the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com. Expert insights on buying and selling farmland in Western Canada.
Welcome to the Farmland Exchange, the official podcast of CLHbid.com, where we bring you expert insights on selling and buying farmland in Western Canada. I'm Devin Davidson, your host. I'm the digital media strategist at CLHbid.com. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about why CLHbid.com was started, what was broken in terms of selling farmland across Western Canada, as well as tell you some interesting stories across early days at CLHbid.com. Make sure you follow us on your podcast platform of choice. This will be available wherever you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and the like. Today, joining me on the show, CEO and founder Roy Carter and Alle Carter, both members of the executive team. Guys, maybe just give everybody a bit of an introduction about yourselves, who you are, what you do, where you're from, and something interesting that people may not know about you.
You go ahead.
Okay. I'm Alle Carter. So I have been with CLHbid since the start. Grew up in the Peace Country, Grand Prairie. We're actually filming this today on our family farm. My great-grandfather homesteaded it in 1911, and I took it over 3 years ago now.
Nice.
Something interesting about myself, I guess that I have my class 1 in between work. I like farming and then delivering some of the CLHbid vans around.
Nice. That's fantastic. Roy?
Yeah. Thanks for the comments about the ancestral farm. It's kind of Devin likes the Oilers and how they start those games.
Yeah.
Our grandfather rode horseback here in 1910 and with his horse and a pack horse.
Nice.
And so we got pretty lucky, I would say, Ellie. 114 years later.
Yeah.
He had to ford rivers where grown men are in fear sometimes now crossing with a riverboat. So, we're pretty lucky. As far as my background, I haven't got far in life. I grew up within a few feet of this tack room in a little house with a family of 7. Went to law school, came back, lost my dad in my 20s and farmed with my mother here.
My first question to you guys is, what was your main motivation or inspiration behind starting CLHbid.com?
The main inspiration, and Ellie, I think you were an undergraduate or just out of high school. The main inspiration, it had, over years, one of the benefits of getting old, you sort of know what doesn't work or learn. The toolbox gets pretty big.
For sure.
But there was kind of a catalyst. Over 10 years ago, I had a call from clients who I knew asking if they could bring in another couple to see me. They had a problem on a tender. And, the day probably changed the rest of my life. Met with them. I still remember where they sat in my office. And they proceeded to tell me about the oil patch had stopped. They'd had some graders, and they were farmers, but basically financial difficulty. They needed to sell some land. Retained a lawyer and asked them about different methods to sell. Since that, I saw the file, the Law Society got involved. But the lady who I didn't know at the time now invites me to her birthday party. Basically, she had a notebook, a 3-ring notebook of everything that had transpired, and showed me the ad. The lawyer said tender was the way to go.
Yep.
Put an ad in a local paper. And it had in the ad that there was what we call a ROFR, a right of first refusal.
Right.
And they were then called by the law firm after the tenders came in. And they had a really beautiful land. I knew the area. And they were told there was only 2 tenders. And we know now if you advertise land for sale, right, Ellie, with a ROFR, generally a lot of people don't even get interested. They know they can be trumped.
Right.
In any event, they told me the story that they thought they'd been had or bid shopped, and listened to the story. And it's kind of the old story about, the doctor killed mom, right? And it's maybe not true, but you kind of listen to it. And I listened to it, but man, there was some stuff that rang a bit true.
Right.
And we as lawyers are allowed to call a party once before they lawyer up. And it turned out the party that was high, they were told, was their tenant. And so I asked for the number and I gave him a call. The 2 couples were in my office, and he picked up, and we have to disclose as lawyers who we are, and told him who I was and was calling about land, and he said, "Have you got more for sale?" And I said, "No, I'm just calling about, I hear you bought some nice land." And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Have you bought inputs for it yet?" And he was kind of talking over me. And yeah, I got inputs. I'll be out there in about 3 weeks. And just guessing, I asked him the question, I said, "I hear you didn't even tender." And his answer was no. And I just about fell off my chair. And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, no, I was just told by the lawyers what the high tender was." And so I said, "Well, you should probably take your tender or your inputs back." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, you're going to need money for a lawyer, and your lawyer buddies are going to need money for a lawyer." Wow. So that was the end of that call. And it turned out the Law Society became involved. And but the big catalyst is my client had a heart attack over it. Medevac to Edmonton. And, in the days that followed up, it's like, it's got to be easier, right? The stress can't be on these owners over that.
Yeah.
There was 2 tenders only. They were super low. It turned out later we sold the property for, a lot more than the highest tender.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I guess that was the main catalyst after years of seeing what didn't work. Sorry about the kind of the long answer there.
No, that's a great story. And honestly, this is the platform for these types of conversations. I think one thing we find lots, and Al, you can probably talk about it more, is at trade shows, we get questions about who we are and how we're different. And we don't really have the opportunity to do that on social media to talk about how we're different. So, I mean, this is just sort of a spin-off question, but maybe you can talk about that a little bit, is who we are and how we are different from.
Yeah. I always ask, how long do you have? Because it's not a one size fits all, for every farm. And we know that. Something we're really proud of is that, the majority of the members on our team are all farmers. We understand it. We know what a big decision it is to sell your farm. And so when we set out to create CLHbid, we really looked at, all the existing avenues that were out there. Mm-hmm. And we really wanted to address all those shortcomings in one platform that was specialized in selling farmland. So that's all we do. We don't know how to do everything for sure, but we do know the space of selling farms.
For
and
sure.
We try to do that, very well. So I would say, there was listing with a realtor was a typical one, and I think we're going to kind of talk about these later a little bit more in depth. Public auction, tender at a law firm, and I guess for anyone maybe that doesn't know what tender is, kind of in that previous story,
sure.
Typically the lawyer will put maybe an ad in a paper or something and say, tenders are open until such a date. That means that everyone has the opportunity to give an amount that they would pay for that land. They bring it typically to the lawyer's office. Is that right? We always refuse to do it. So I've actually never seen one, but you just put, your high bid in an envelope, and it's open behind closed doors. You're not there. There's no transparency. Yeah. And so we really, wanted to create a system that buyers also trusted, because our system wouldn't work unless they trusted it, and something that was transparent, as Roy said, takes the stress off the sellers. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people, and we'll talk about this again later, but don't trust tender for the lack of transparency, and they always don't want to leave money on the table. No one does, and you don't know what that land's worth. You don't know your high number, and if you were told, you could have maybe had that land for an extra $1,000, would you have probably bid an extra $1,000? I would say so. 100%. So there's just no true price discovery, and so we tried to address all of those shortcomings.
Okay.
I think a good example in close proximity here, my mom, who was left alone on the farm here at 59 and then spent another 20 years in the house, her good friend, Vera, 3 miles away, her land went up for tender, and on the home half, there was 3 legals because she had a subdivision. Mm-hmm. It ended up 3 owners. It was closed bid tender. Obviously, some of them would have moved to take a half, as opposed to farming a quarter, right?
Right. Yep.
So issues like that just don't work. I had an older guy, when I say older, probably about my age, but down at Granham, Alberta, tell me one time, he said, submitting a closed bid tender to a lawyer, he said, that's like playing darts blindfolded with one dart.
Right.
And there's just so much to it. you have no idea if you hit the center or not because you don't know what they tell you is 100% the truth.
Yeah.
In building CLHbid, we spent a couple years, 10, 11 years ago, and I went to a Mennonite farm. They were growing organic oats and would sell it down into Lower Mainland, and really progressive. And they had a boardroom, unbelievable, like super progressive farm.
Right.
And we wanted input from buyers too on if we're going to build something, we need to engage them. We only act for the seller.
Yeah.
But part of that is you got to look after the buyer. Yeah. And, their comment was, we think we've been high a lot of times on a tender, but we don't get it because our wives wear a bonnet in their hair. And we don't drink whiskey at the curling rink.
Yeah.
And build us a system where if we're high, we get a notice right away where there's no chance to bid shop.
Right.
And so that was part of what we built.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe in that same vein, Roy or Ali, what were some of the other key issues you found in selling farmland, across the market in general? Like what else was happening that wasn't really fulfilling the need and doing justice for both sellers and buyers?
Mm-hmm.
I would say lack of price discovery. It's not a movable object. They say land is the only commodity once purchased cannot be moved.
Right.
And because of that, arbitrage in the market doesn't work. It's not like buying a combine in Winnipeg and one at Claresholm. Eventually it'll just be freight that'll be the difference because the market will work. People will buy and sell and bring that market together.
Right.
But of course, such isn't the case with land. And I think the lack of understanding on that, list doesn't work because of that. List works where you have houses in town that are generic.
Right.
And you can't move houses in town, but you can move streets. So the market works.
Gotcha.
But because there's so many external factors that affect land value, it's too hard to come up with a list. So we didn't think list worked. It's a wild guess with farmland. And it really comes from, can you appraise farmland very accurately? No. We had a sale here a couple years ago, a court-ordered sale. And the court order King's Bench was that it had to be sold by a realtor. Mm-hmm. It was listed for $500,000 for 6 months without an offer. And then the lawyers came to us and said, can you sell this? And we said, you have to go back and get the order changed. We're not realtors.
Right.
We're CLHbid. They got it changed, and we started the bidding at $450,000, and it sold for $1 million. Wow. So that gives you an example of how list doesn't work. People don't trust it. And so where I'm going there is price discovery. Yeah. We didn't see it working, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've also taken land that has been listed for, a couple years even, and sold it for more than that list price.
Right.
And after we actually called the high bidder and said, I bet you wish you would have bought it at the list price. And he said, no, because on your system, I know that it was worth that. I know someone is bidding $10,000 right behind me.
Yeah.
And I didn't overpay, actually. They just don't trust that price because they wonder how much air is in it. And for the farmer selling, you're really capping yourself at what you'd ever get. You put that list price on it and everyone waits for the sign to rot off the fence post and for that price just to start coming down.
For sure.
So why would you ever, you put a cap on that?
Yeah. Well, that seems like a good segue into the next question, which was, what makes CLHbid different from those more traditional methods of selling? So we've got private tender, we've got public auction, we've got private sale, and we've got professional realtors. So maybe talk a bit about each of those, how we're different, and the benefits for the seller. I know we've touched on some of them already, but maybe dive into each one a little in more depth. But which one do you want to start with, Rally? Private tender, sale, auction, or realtor?
I guess we could continue maybe with the realtor because we were kind of on that segue. So right off the bat, we are not realtors or auctioneers. We always ask that question at trade shows. Do you know about CLHbid? Oh yeah, I see your vans around. Who are we? Oh, you must be an auctioneer or a realtor. We're not. So we are a law firm. Roy and I are lawyers, and we have an exemption to trade in real estate. So we don't have to be realtors. And even if you go to a public auction, they still have to team up with a realtor and then a law firm. Right. So that is how, we are different right off the bat that way. And then kind of as we explained, with list price, there is just no price discovery. And also packaging. I think that is a huge one. We've seen where there's an assemblage of 40 quarters in Saskatchewan and they try listing it just 40 quarters together for $20 million.
Right.
Well, for every person that has $20 million, you have 50 who have, 500 grand who will want to just buy one quarter.
Yeah.
So the way you package farmland really matters. And I think that just goes to our ag backgrounds. We understand it. We understand how it's farmed. If this is farmed as a half, there's only access into it as a half. It has to be sold as this. But then one of my favorite stories that you always tell actually is kind of a segue, I think, into public auction. Where you did for a lot of years take your clients to public auction, because when they would come to you and ask, how do I sell? Kind of the only price discovery at that time was public auction.
Right.
And maybe you want to tell your story about that.
Sure. Yeah, I got out of law school at 23, and a client of mine, Don Pearson, and his wife, June, walked into my office my first summer, and they were some of the biggest, them and Boric, which became the biggest owner at Twin Otters worldwide, Ken Boric. Both of those boys are from 40 miles a year, 50 miles. Adventurous, went to the North Slope, and I got lucky having Don as a client in June. And Don accumulated a lot of land, and he came to me. He'd lost 2 sons, so unfortunate. Came to me, probably 15 years ago and said, I want to sell my 28 quarters. I believed in price discovery. He said, well, what about if I do it locally? His comment was he was afraid of selling to what he called the black hats, right? Mm-hmm. The Hutterites. And which is, an issue for some, and other people love him as neighbors, and they couldn't find better neighbors.
Right.
In his case, I don't think he didn't live next to any colony. He just didn't understand it. But he liked his neighbors, and he'd give back to the community. He'd planted all the trees in Hythe for free, just a real class guy. So he said, I said, I'll take you to auction. And he said, no, I'm going to try and do it myself. And I was like, no, you're going to have everybody upset because you're too good-natured. So it turned out Dave Ritchie, who started Ritchie Brothers, was a good friend of his. Right. They were about the same age. And so we engaged, and I'd taken a fair amount of clients to Ritchie Brothers. We engaged Dave, and Dave actually said he'd fly up in his private jet and sit with Don. So away we went, Theater B in Grand Prairie at RB. And sale went rock star and went, for well above what he expected. But you learn from a sale like that. I could see collusion. I could see neighbors talking to neighbors up there, who's on, who's off, that type of deal. But when the sale was over, a guy walked up to me, and, Don's number was X, and he walked up and said, I'll give you $1 million more than the sum of what you just got. And I knew he wasn't kidding. I knew the guy.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I can't do that. It's auction. Again, auction's different than tender. When it's auctioned, it's over.
Right.
In a tender situation, I could have maybe. But anyway, I said, I can't do that. But I said, why didn't you bid? And he said, I'm not going to start what I can't finish. I'm not going to end up with 14 or what they call one rubber boot.
Yeah.
And he said, it's too risky to get run because then I have to unload. And, I drove out of Theater B, or I drove out of Ritchie Brothers that day, and I thought, we just left $1 million in there, right? Because we didn't have the right system, right?
Yeah.
And again, one of the benefits of getting old and seeing what doesn't work, right?
For sure.
And that really is the start of our on block, where we have 2 rounds to engage that second round. And in that area, as part of building it, we looked around the world. A lot of countries were ahead of us. New Zealand, Australia in price discovery.
Okay.
There's one in the States called Iowa Auction, where we looked at that, where they would bid out, like Ellie said, the key is you got to bid out these individual quarters at first.
Right.
And it's only fair to engage the smaller farmer too, right?
Yep.
And what they'll do there is they'll bid out quarters, and then if it stops, say, at 20 million, they restart. Don't make the big guys play the first round. And then they start at 20 million plus $1 over where it stopped.
Right.
And the small guys in Iowa or in the Midwest down there see it as wasting their time. They're just price setters. Right. So, we took information like that and said, okay, that doesn't work from input down there. Let's tweak it. And again, we'd go back to buyers and say, is this going to work for you?
Interesting.
So, yeah.
So maybe just for our listeners, explain on block, just how that process works a little bit more in terms of CLHbid.com. I don't know if Ali, if you want to talk about that, or Roy.
Sure. Yeah. So kind of, you're right. The Iowa auction method didn't work because the smaller farmers said, I'm not even going to bother to go get financing because I'm just a price setter. So the larger farmers were able to kind of just steal it. So when we developed on block, we said, okay, so the larger farmer who will pay a premium for the assemblage, and who in the previous story, you know, was going to pay $1 million for that assemblage over what they had.
Right.
And so the larger farmer has to participate in that first round is the big difference. So each sale varies, and each sale, you know, is tailored for what makes sense. But for example, if you have a sale of 10 quarters, someone would have to have bid on all parcels in the first round and maybe been high on three of the parcels to then be eligible to participate in that en bloc round. So it does all get bid out in the first round, and then there's eligibility requirements to participate in that en bloc round, which could continue getting bid out.
Right.
And there's typically an en bloc premium. So for example, in that one, it might be, you know, depending on the land, premium of $500,000. So then that en bloc round, the bidding starts at $500,000 over and above the high bids in the first round.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So we really try to, you know, also cater to the smaller farmers. We're not out here to just cater to the, you know, the big guys per se, the colonies or anyone. We're really trying to make it fair for everyone, and sometimes that's a misconception. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Right. It exists for that purpose, to give everyone fair opportunity, right?
Yeah, if you're coming 20 miles or 10 miles, you don't want to be caught with half.
That's right.
En bloc guarantees you get all or none.
Yeah.
And buyers like it. And if they like it, that means more money for our seller. The more avenues that we can put out there that buyers engage, the better our client is.
That's right.
You know, we have some people in the industry of selling land that said, you know, we'll say CLHbid has this stupid French name, right? And nobody can understand it. Believe me, buyers understand it. And but our answer to that is, well, it's just another road. If you want to be high on all 28, it's still there. We didn't take the old highway out.
Right.
But it might be really risky to try and be high on 28, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Roy, you touched on it earlier, ROFRs, right of first refusal, and tenant bias. That seems to be something that we encounter a lot with sales. You know, sellers say, well, I want to sell to my neighbor because he's been a good tenant or whatever. And so how do you approach that at CLHbid.com? Like if someone comes to you and says, I have a tenant and they have right of first refusal, what's your advice to them usually? Like how does that process work?
So we won't sell land with a ROFR on it. You know, it just kills the price. We had a sale near Vermilion in our first or second year, I guess. And the fellow had passed away, and he'd told his wife to contact us. She lived in Sherwood Park then. Mm-hmm. And the tenant had came to see her before the funeral and said, you know, I want a ROFR. And she said, you know, he's been good, which is common, right? These owners have a good relationship with most of their tenants. And she said, you know, Ed said to call you. Can I give him a ROFR? And we said, no, he doesn't need one. With CLHbid, he can just bid. And he's just a hair above everybody else. And if you give him the trump card, you're going to lose everybody, right?
Right.
And we said, we think on 3 quarters, we estimated total guess, but we said, we think it'll cost you $500,000. And it was like, well, she had no idea, right? And people will go and seek advice and say, well, a ROFR cost me any money. And it's like, no, it just means I got to pay what somebody else was. But that's not true because nobody shows up at the party.
Yep.
But on that sale, we had numerous calls from that Vermilion area saying, is there a ROFR on that land or not? And if there is, we're backing away.
Right.
And we would have to email. And then it was like, this is really weird. And then we found out later after the sale that the tenant actually was spreading the rumor they had a ROFR to basically kill the price, right?
Brutal.
So, you know, they come about hundreds of years ago for good reason before communication.
Right.
You know, I'm looking after your asset or whatever in England. Don't sell it out from under me. Give me a chance.
Yeah.
But now there's absolutely no reason for a ROFR if it's a public sale. So, you know, our advice to landowners, if you're doing a lease and the tenant wants a ROFR, give it to him, but exempt out that if it's a public sale, he doesn't need it. He's got the right or she's got the right to bid, right?
Right. Yeah.
Otherwise, it can drastically affect you, right?
And if they come to you with a tenant with a ROFR, you just advise them to basically hold out until to the end of the term of the lease. Is that sort of
exactly, Devin? Some are good. Some tenants, when I say good, they would probably have a different view. Some will just say, "Hey, I don't have a problem, Mabel. I know you want your money. You've lost your husband. I'm okay with the sale.
Yeah.
I can bid." So that's my ROFR. Other ones will take a hard line, and it's like, "No, that ROFR staying, and you're going to end up waiting to monetize your land, right?"
Yeah.
So some will, sometimes offer them a bit of money or something to get rid of it. It all varies upon how hard and fast the tenant is on keeping it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes into private sale really nicely, where we say that, we really try to take the stress off the seller, as we mentioned earlier. And it's hard when you're farming in an area, you're farming next to, land around me hasn't moved much. It's been the same family since my great grandfather was here. You have, long relations with those families. Sometimes you're farming next to a nephew. Sometimes your nephew is farming your land, or you have a really great tenant. And in our case, you can tell all of those people, you've been a great tenant, you're a great nephew, I hope you get it. You can bid on sale day, and you're not picking between people. You're not choosing relations. You're not trying to figure out, okay, he offered me this much. How much more are you going to offer me? Everyone at the end of the day doesn't like that, and they all kind of back off if they feel like they're getting played a little bit.
Right.
And so with our system, everyone does have a fair opportunity, but you're not the one trying to choose who to sell it to, because in the end, you're not going to make anyone happy.
Right.
We sold land down by Claire's home, and the seller thought that the Hutterites would probably buy it, but knew that if he sold directly to them, all the neighbors in the area would be mad. So put it on our site, and they did end up buying it. And he said, all the neighbors kept talking to me because they know that they could have bid. They had the opportunity. They were bidding. They just, didn't keep going.
Totally.
Getting back to the house deal, often it's the widow on the farm. And, as a kid growing up, I used to watch my dad, mix carbine in a sprayer tank with his arm, right? And the amount of farmers around here that went before their wives is scary, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that was part of it, but definitely as a kid, I saw stuff that, we don't see nowadays. So often it was a case that we saw, 82-year-old Mabel at the kitchen table, and the tenant has been plowing her out. He has been cultivating her garden. He has been good to her.
Yeah.
And it's like, Mabel, your land's worth $300,000 a quarter, right? And and they're not adversarial. They're beautiful people, right?
Yeah.
And I think farmers by nature are not adversarial. So they had no way to say no. And, they certainly weren't going to go sell it out from under the tenant. And often deals were done under duress, in my mind, where, that was part of the reason for CLHbid as well. Basically give Mabel a chance to say, hey, you've been awesome to me. You've been good. I hope you get it. But I don't know what it's worth.
Yeah.
You bet. It was actually booked to be our first sale. And it was a cousin to the couple that came into my office that had the tender shop by the lawyer. And so then she heard about us through her cousin and said, sell my quarter. And beautiful lady, Naomi, you know her. She had a jewelry store in a small town. And she got it right away. And I still remember the day she got Wi-Fi in her car and I had to go see it. But she was just really cool. Anyway, she said, sell my quarter. And it was like, really? Like, are you in that community? And it was like, yeah. All these neighbors come in, and all the guys, and they, oh, Naomi, I love your jewelry and all this. And she said they go to Costco and buy it. And I'm sponsoring their kids in the hockey teams.
Yeah.
And she said, let's figure out what it's worth. And, it was fun that day. She didn't end up being our first client. We did sell her in our first year. But we take her away from those buyers. We went and sat with her.
Yep.
And she said, Betty, my friend has the Dunvegan Inn. Let's go and we'll have a few drinks and watch the sale, right?
Yeah.
And, she was late 70s or something then. And just with a few seconds to go, there was a bid. And she texted her son and said, oh, we sold it for $400. And I was told by an evaluation it was $240. And, and it was like, it's not done yet, right? And the bidding started. The next day, the buyer went walking downtown Fairview on the street, and a guy come across the street, in the old town's 300-foot wide streets, and came across and said, what are you doing reckoning land prices in the area? What's going on? And the guy that bought it said to him, why don't you go find the guy that was number 2 bidder? He's the problem, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, okay. But anyway, we've really, I think, leveled the playing field and allowed those people to say, I don't want to wreck our relationship. You've been good, but just bid. Right?
Yeah. Well, the next question I had here, like farmland values have been growing in past years. I think the FCC report was at 12% nationwide last year. But one function of CLHbid is maximizing value for farmland, right? That's one of our functions for our sellers. So how do you balance that maximizing value with transparency and fairness for buyers? Like there's kind of that push and pull, right? How do you balance that?
Right off, so on our site, it does appear like an auction on sale day. It is online on our website, and it's open for an hour, and bidding will continue beyond that hour if there's bids in the last 2 minutes. But being a law firm, when they bid, they also bid the offer to purchase. So right. We allow a lot more control for the seller, but kind of where I'm going here is we can also come up with some pretty unique solutions for buyers as well. We have a sale coming up where we had an interested party come to us and say, would your client offer a vendor take back, personal right. mortgage? And we said, we'll take it to her, absolutely. And she agreed. So they're actually carrying 80% of the purchase price over 5 years. And that's huge for the buyers.
For sure.
So we will work, that only maximizes value for our client. Whether they get it in the end, maybe not, but they will keep bidding and, continue increasing that value for our seller. So we do really try to come up with solutions to engage all parties, with FCC still providing, 100% financing based on existing equity too. Mm-hmm. That's also very promising for buyers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think exactly where you're going. I think the key is we respect buyers. They have the money. Mm-hmm. And, but you got to give them confidence the value's there. Yeah. We never sell stuff for over fair market value. Right. That it sells for fair market value. So they don't have to overpay. They're just a hair more than somebody else. But they get total comfort in when they're outbid. But part of that is integrity, too. After 8 years, we've never bought 1 acre of land. We don't have proxies where the house knows what somebody's going to go to, et cetera. And a big deal, too, is that I think they trust a law firm in that we don't disclose any names. Mm-hmm. So that's a big deal for people not to lose relationships, whether it be, friends, cousins, neighbors, or whatever. They don't mind if they own it, but they don't want their name out if they're second.
Right. And
they do know historically, other avenues. We'll see now there's a thing called progressive tender, which has really been around forever. But some realtors are seeing what we're doing and then kind of coming into the tender space a bit. It's really bid shopping, which in some cases is illegal. But really what they do is they get rounds and, sometimes they'll rent a hotel room and they'll let people bid around and then some go home and then some stay. But by the end of it, and there was just one, in Northern Alberta recently, a law firm did, everybody knew who was on at the end. And people really don't like that. And some people don't even participate. Right. It's like, I don't mind buying land, but I don't want to lose relationships and... they're tight communities, right?
For sure they are, yeah. Mm-hmm. Ali, you just mentioned it, but each sale is unique, and part of our process is that sellers have more control over the process. So maybe just touch on how that works in practice. I mean, what type of control, what things can they do custom for their sale?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So I would say everything is customized. So, right from the first phone call, we kind of figure out why are you selling, what does your land look like? What is your goal? If you want to stay, we understand it's a huge decision to move off the farm in a lot of cases. So for example, we've had couples before that say, I really just want to stay in my house for a couple more years. So we've subdivided their house off. And then maybe that is also an option to the high bidder of the home quarter. Mm-hmm. Really, anything we can customize that way.
Yep.
And then the offer to purchase, everything's in there. So often we have where we sell, they say, well, when can I sell? My lease agreement's not up until, when the crop's off. So we can actually sell in the summer, and then the possession in that offer to purchase is subject to the tenant getting the crop off. Right. Also, something that, we'll have an episode on as well is the whole, maximizing after-tax dollars. That's huge and very unique to everyone's circumstances, whether they've already used a lot of their capital gains, how the land is held. We do really understand that space. And we really love to tell a story. It kind of goes into the marketing a little bit, but each farm has a story. And so we really immerse ourselves and try to tell that story. So we have, we do the typical drone videography, the still, photography. And then we have a script writer come in and really bring that farm to life. We like to sit at the table and listen to what used to go on around here and what their favorite parts about it are. Often they'll say that little piece over there it would be great for a young family to build a house. We'll tell that story. And then we have a, voice actor that reads over that script, and we pair it all together. And we've had, quite a few people who don't even need to go look at the land nowadays. And they sometimes even call us after the high bidder and say, was there a house on that ranch I just bought? And I have to laugh sometimes, but, buying land has changed quite a bit. So really nothing is out of the question for customization on our platform, I would say.
I would say a big deal is set exit date. Mm-hmm. You can do all the tax planning you want, but if you don't have a set exit date, it's thrown in the garbage.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. If you go to list it then and Trudeau's changing the plans. This year, I was driving one day from Saskatoon, and it should have been like nice weather. People had been seeding, but it was a snowstorm in I think I was talking to you that day, Devin, like the end of April. Yeah. But it was wicked roads. Yeah. And the client had called from Southern Alberta and said, "Can you get us to the curb before Trudeau's change?" I think it was June 26th or whatever, the inclusion rate, right? Yep. And you can't do that with a listing, right?
No.
And so he said, "But that's really short. So how do you get us to the curb, save like tremendous amount in tax, but allow these people to bid, right?" And it's like, yeah, we can do it. We'll have the sale before. We'll close it before. Super tight fuse then, because you need about 30 days to close. For sure. So we were really talking a sale in a 4-week period. Yeah. And but we'll do a vendor take back and basically allow the buyer then to pay in full in the fall, but be on side with CRA, right? Yeah. And the sale was fabulous. Some of the highest, we're told by FCC, highest dryland sale ever in Western Canada, $2.5 million a quarter for non-irrigated. So it's those kinds of things that you can control. We think our seller client owns the land, they should be able to call the shots. Where with a realtor, the shots are called by a purchaser. They make the offer.
Right.
And it's kind of backwards, right? So we take the control. It allows us, with share deals as well. There's a fair amount of land in farm corporations.
Right.
And so that's a whole different animal. Allows us to do the share deal on a set date to deal with that issue. So, yeah.
Okay. For executors and beneficiaries when they're dealing with estate sales, because that's something we deal with quite often. Mm-hmm. I know we've talked about it lots, where it's the kids of whoever is actually selling the land. Yep. What's the real advantage for them in using CLHbid.com?
Yeah. So executors have a duty to, maximize the estate for the beneficiaries, essentially. And so they have a lot of pressure to figure out, what's this land worth? How am I going to sell it? How am I going to make sure that all the beneficiaries are happy with it at the end of the day and don't come back on me and say, you sold it below fair market value or something. Mm-hmm. And so often we've seen estates with 18 beneficiaries that you can get quite big ones. Wow. And how do you keep everyone happy? How do you pick, everyone has a relationship with a realtor. Someone wants to use their friend. What's this list price? Who do we sell it to? Maybe some of the beneficiaries in some cases are farming and, might want to buy the land. And so how do we make it fair for everyone? And so on our site, as we've alluded to before, everyone has a chance. And then at the end of the day, you can't say that wasn't fair market value. With the amount of marketing we put into it, everyone had the opportunity to participate. Yep. It's fair for all. So it really does also relieve that burden from the executors.
All right. We're going to switch gears a little bit here, guys. We're going to move into early days of CLHbid.com, maybe get into some stories and some fun stuff like that. So the first question was just looking back at early days, what challenges did you face getting that platform off the ground? How long from concept to product was it, and what challenges did you face?
Maybe I'll go there first. But it was basically the two of us. Alle was riding at a high level, then show jumping, with a team out of Vancouver, and since that incident with the tender shop, it was like somebody should build something here to fix this. Yeah. And I still recall a call from Pilot Mound from a lawyer saying, and I'd sent him a tender for a client. And he called me and said, my guy doesn't like the guy that's high. Will your guy move a bit, but he doesn't have to match it? And it was like, man, that's crazy dirty, this game, right?
Right.
And it was just, and you would get clients in that would say, will you tender $10 over the highest tender? And it's just like sleazy stuff. But you saw it. It was going on all the time, right? And so anyway, it was like, you almost sort of don't. I hardly told my wife because I had to spend money, but I started meeting IT people, but basically it was because of Alle's connection. I knew a guy that was into marketing in Vancouver, and then he knew IT people. Yeah. And so away we went, and it was basically a Russian that had emigrated that was the IT guy, programmer. Yeah. And it was kind of a shoestring budget. But I'd listen to these kids around the riding at Thunderbird show stables in Vancouver. And they'd be trading stuff on the internet. And me, kind of old school. But I was listening, and it was like, then they would get close to closing, and they would go like to a Tim Hortons to meet this person and do the transaction, right? And it was like, man, there's somehow that it's got to be online, the answer to this problem, right?
Sure.
So that's kind of where we started. And then, built from there. But the little old lady with the jewelry store was supposed to be the first client a year out. So we had lots of time until a guy by the name of Tommy Roycroft and Carol, just the beauty of a guy, come into my office December 22nd, 2016. And he had his cowboy hat on, really well-respected thoroughbred trainer, him and his sons. Anyway, he come in, and they had one son with him, and he was sitting there, and it was like, want to sell my ranch, right? And I was like, okay. And I was listening to him, and it was like, man, oh man, this is exactly our space, what I'm working on, right? And so I said, like, in the next year or two, and he said, no, by April. So it was like, Tommy. And and he had like 9 or 10 quarters butting to the Smoky, but it was a beautiful layout. But I knew one of the problems with auction, couldn't take him to auction because the guy that takes the home quarter then can steal everything else.
Right.
So everybody else goes to their truck. He takes the power, the water. And we always say, take the heart and leave the carcass. Yeah. And we knew that was a big problem with auction on choice. So I knew I couldn't take Tommy to auction, even though I'd taken farmers with raw land. This was not a case, right? And I'm just, sitting there listening to it, and it's like, oh, my Lord. And so I disclosed to him, I said, I'm working on the answer to this deal. Can you wait? And he was like, no, I want to move. We got more horses coming. And so I explained what I was going to go to an online tender system to clean it all up, all transparency and all the stuff. But I said it won't be ready. And I won't use the exact words, but he basically said, get it blank, blank ready.
Yep.
And I said, are you telling me you'll give me your whole ranch on April 5th? And this is December 22nd. And he stood up and shook my hand and said, you got it.
Wow.
So I went home, told my wife that we're not going on holidays. So basically had Christmas and flew to Vancouver, and we had a set date and didn't even know the name of CLHbid, but started dealing with programmers and sort of went from there.
Was it the night before the sale, he gave you a call and said, are you going to put some signs out here, Roy? It's like, we didn't think about that.
Yeah, so I mean, it wasn't easy. Luckily, just a few days, he was the 22nd, New Year's Eve. My wife and I went to a New Year's Eve party at Mad Hatter's. And a good friend of ours that I knew was like top drawer as videography, and that was Mike Reeve, who's a big part of our team.
Yep, producer Mike.
Yeah, and Mike was there, and Mike, Crystal, his wife, just got married, but was terminally ill with cancer. I hadn't seen Mike, and I knew class guy, just parked everything for a year. And, Mike had lost weight and disheveled, and he was all in. But I talked to him a bit that night, and I said, I got this idea, and I know you're the guy for it, but I won't bug you. And he kind of gave me his word, Roy, a day or two or something, I'll do it, right? And so he said he had some different ideas, and we knew if we were going to do it, we wanted to market different. Mm-hmm. And then things kind of got a bit crazy. Then Tommy, the rancher, of course, had some people that heard maybe what he was going to do.
Yeah.
And one was kind of a shirt-tail relative, and made him an offer and to avoid us, right?
Yeah.
And so anyway, Tommy, I still remember the night. In January, it was dark, and I got the call, and it was like, Roy, yeah. And it's like, I got this offer for this amount, right? And it's like, wow, Tommy, you better take it, right? And I'm good, Tommy, And he said, no, Roy. He said, I wouldn't have this offer if it wasn't for you. And it's like, that's a real person, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And it was like, I don't know if we can get it for you, Tommy. And it's like, no, I'm good. I'm all in.
Wow.
And not many people. So Mike Reeve and I, at that time we didn't drone. Mike organized a helicopter.
Yeah. And
we got up in the helicopter, and I got a text from the relative saying we'd be safer on the ground. But Mike did basically the start of the CLHbid visual side, where voice actor, great video work. Yeah. And people were shocked by it. Going to Allie's point, it was busy. I went to watch her ride down to California, and her coaches thought I was mad at him, but I had to just go back to the house and type because the website had to be built by this date, right? Yeah. It was. Tommy did call me a couple days before the sale and said, "Hey, Roy, there's trucks out." It was spring early, and he said, "There's trucks out all over here in the mud, and there's no signs. I can't find the land." And it's like, "Oh man, yeah, we forgot signs." So I emailed. I have a hobby in photography. Went in Photoshop. Did up a sign that is our sign today. True story. And I emailed it to SOS Graphics, and Tommy said, if you just get them that sign, I'll go pick them up. And him and Dale Stark went and picked up the signs, and they put them on some poplar trees around their fence posts. Yeah. And I had a white background with the same arrow and CLH, this land for sale, and all we've did is reverse colors, but yeah. Anyway,
we've learned a lot. Now our signs have cement bases. They're pickered with a semi-truck. That was something else that we tried to do a bit differently, but it's been fun.
Well, so that kind of leads into a couple of the questions I had. So the platform itself, for the first question, is it's completely proprietary, correct? Like this isn't WordPress with a plugin. Like this is built custom from the ground up.
Yeah, absolutely. We have you and I have meetings with the programmers once, I think, every other week. There's a lot of things that go into it. There's a lot of people out there that just use plugins, and it's just so much harder to control and to customize. All of ours is 100% custom. The 2-minute refresh on the clock, that took a lot of work on block. Universal close to make sure all parcels stay live, so that if parcel 1's going for too much, you can go down to parcel 3, and if it's going too high, go back to 2, and just ways of maximizing value that we can really customize. We've had some ranches recently that have wanted options for they've had a really nice Angus herd. Have an option for my cows. Great, we will customize that. We will work on it. Nothing is, I would say, too big to say no to.
Yeah, and part of that is we answer to the Law Society. We sort of have a different boss, and which is a fairly high level. So if you have third-party plugins and that, where's your information?
Right.
And where the bidder, when we tell bidders their names will never be disclosed, we need to have everybody in-house. Yeah. Right now we have 2 full-time programmers. Yeah. And again, it's a team. One farms himself and is into the sheep business, but he was programming for a company that was doing work worldwide, right? Mm-hmm. And we've got an amazing team, but it's all in-house.
Yeah, and we're very selective about who we bring in on our team. We really like dealing with real people. And, we don't just hire salesmen to go out and try to get some farms. If we hire ranchers, farmers, if you're selling a grain farm, you will get someone who knows grain farming. If you're selling a ranch, you will get a rancher. We really do care about the people, and we want to offer the best services that we can for them.
Yeah, totally. It's you're not going to find a better team anywhere in any business. I can for sure say that. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a special team. I'm happy to be a part of it. No question. How much has the platform changed from day one to today?
Yeah, I think in some ways quite a bit. In some, not so much. I know for that first sale, the Rycroft one, I was actually sitting in sociology 101 or something. It was 3 days long. I remember for the first 2 days, there was no bids. Mom was texting me thinking she should cancel the celebratory food she'd ordered. It was like, is anything going to happen? And then everyone waits for the last 10 minutes always. So it's like, let's shorten this up. Let's not waste 3 days of people's time. They're sometimes seeding, harvesting. They don't need to be on their phone for that. So we now do it for an hour, and the clock will keep extending. We've always had that. The looks of the site have changed quite a bit. We didn't have universal close at the start. Okay. I know, I think it was Christmas time. We were with the family, and we're watching a bull sale, and it was like, this is pretty cool. They all stay live. So, your bull that you thought you were going to buy is going too high. So you go back up to the other one. And so we figured, we need to have that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the bones, like the videography and everything, have really, since the start, we took that pretty seriously to do well.
I would say the layers, every sale you learn, the layers of tax, foreign ownership, all of that. I mean, the team there has just got deeper and deeper. And realtors, we can do what realtors do. We can do 100% what they do. They can't do what we do. Right. It's and the analogy, I'm not sure a good one, but maybe it's, if you need glasses and need your eyes checked, you can go to Walmart to the optometrist and they're good. But, if you got a problem with your eyes, you go to an ophthalmologist, right? And I guess that's what we see ourselves as. We're not one-dimensional. We'd like sometimes to engage 2-3 years ahead of time from a tax point of view, right? And then we go right to the close. This is not a listing deal where the sign blows over in the ditch. We're start to finish, right? Yeah. And there's one phone number to call if there's any issues, right? For sure. So it's quite different from that point of view. You've got a sale now where there's know what you don't know, and there's a rule with CRA that this daughter that's selling some land, if she listed it and put it on the market before 3 years are up, she's offside. It's not the sale date, and who would think of that, right? Yeah. So, they approach us and it's like, we basically can't talk. You got to park, stay on side, get on side, and then we can talk about marketing, right? Yeah. So that's a 3-year deal. But that's fine. But that's a space we live, and so we believe there's a lot of added value in all of the other layers, right? For
sure. That's to make sure she got her capital gains exemption,
right? Yeah.
That you're talking about. Yeah,
totally. Right. Yeah.
Just going back to that first sale, the very first sale, what was the end result? It went well. Did you get to eat your celebratory food? Did that all go okay? Yeah.
Alana, Allie's mom, my wife, she said, should we book someplace? Kind of like your Oilers, if they order the champagne for the 7th game, don't do that.
Don't do that.
And so I said, don't do that. Let's do food, and then you can just, we'll give it away or something if it doesn't go good. I would say we got lucky that day. But sometimes you make your own luck too, I guess. But we got lucky. It went really well. The food arrived. The bidding started with about 15 minutes to go. Mm-hmm. And we set new prices that day. Wow. So it was a game changer. We beat the number that Tommy was offered in January that I was afraid I couldn't beat. Tommy got to the racetrack and won an unbelievable number of races. It was on a Wednesday. We went out and had a bit of a shaker that night with his family, and I was having coffee the next morning with Alana. And it was like, man, we were so busy the last 4 months. you didn't have time to be scared.
Right.
And Allie's got a saying from her riding on her tack deal that says, obstacles are those things in life you see when you take your eyes off your goal. Mm-hmm. And that was it. It was Thursday morning having coffee with Alana, and it was like I jumped a crevice and I could hear rocks falling behind me. Wow. It was like, holy shit. What could have happened? And it's like you just have another sip of coffee and it didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So had a lot of things come right, but it was, starting it right too with Mike Reeve and his videography, and we still have the same voice guy.
Yeah.
And, obviously our marketing was local. I think we had one radio station. That's all changed, but the core basics were, don't disclose names, true price discovery. It was there at day one, I would say. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What's been the feedback across Western Canada from clients and other buyers in terms of the platform? What have they had to say? I'm hoping mostly good, but maybe there's some feedback there too.
We were just at the Red Deer Farm Show, and I think we had quite a few buyers come up to us and say, I love bidding on your site. For the, facts that we've mentioned, we don't disclose them. He said, I know I've been bidding against my neighbor, but he won't know that. I can still go have coffee with him, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And then, from our sellers, I would say they're happy. They like it.
Definitely sellers like us more than buyers. There's some sellers, or buyers rather, that wished we weren't around.
Right.
They'd prefer to go to the old folks' home or the kitchen table or whatever.
Sure.
So we get the odd rude email about destroying the farm community and all that. No doubt about that. I think generally though, definitely sellers, the big deal is stress-free, maximize value. And we have one law firm in Manitoba that's reached out and said, this old school tender doesn't, even though they do it as part of their business, it doesn't work. And they know that. They were telling us here a while ago, we had a Zoom call with them, LA, and we've done some work where they'll refer clients to us now. But they said, they had a tender and they tendered for a client, put the tender out. They had 11 tenders come in. Half of them were their own clients and one got it. And what they said is we had one happy person and everybody else thinks we either shopped it to our best client. Mm-hmm. They're all upset, right? So from that point of view, we just had a call yesterday with a big farm advisory business that had heard about us. And so I would say generally receptive for sure. Definitely there is some buyers that aren't a fan of ours, but they do like that they know they don't overpay, and I believe they trust us.
Right.
Yeah.
So they just think maybe they could get it cheaper if we weren't around.
And what I always say is, it works great being at the kitchen table if you're the one at the kitchen table.
Right.
How many times are you not, though? And how many times do you wish you would have had a chance at it? And so we're just giving everyone a chance at it.
For sure.
Something else I want to say, too, is we are so not out here to destroy the family farm. That's something that, we all hold very dear to our heart. We're sitting in our family farm because I don't want to sell it. So we get that. If you have kids that can keep farming, by all means, that is everyone's dream. Yep. But there's some people who don't have that. And so we are here to help, those folks.
100%. What's one success story for each of you that stands out the most after 8 going into 9 years of CLHbid.com?
Well, you think, maybe, for me, it wouldn't be one, and it's not numbers. It's not our biggest sale. We can change people's lives, and we have. For me, probably the special deal is the widow where, maybe she's got 2 or 3 quarters, but, you can maybe double what she would have sold for. The one at Vermilion, I was saying, she was offered 1.4. We got her 2.4, and with some tax planning, she would double her money. And she was a pretty young widow. Her life's changed. Mm-hmm. And we went and watched the sale with her, and she poured wine. And it was like, this is why we did this. There's nobody bugging her today. They're killing each other bidding. And she's having a wine, right?
Yeah.
And she just doubled her money. So those events are game changers. To have an idea, to actually assist people, in those situations. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say mine are very similar. Those ones are always dear to our hearts. One popped into my mind, though. Bridget and I actually went and met them not too far from here, so kind of in the Peace Country. And I had sheep at the time, and so I was with their sheep hanging out. And, they had no idea what their land was worth. They lived in a pretty small modular home, and they kind of just wanted to get ahead of it a little bit. Things were kind of on the downturn. And like I said, they didn't know what it was worth. So we started bidding, and I think it doubled the start bid that day or something. And anyway, she texted me. We weren't together, but I got a video of them watching it and crying and cheering. And it's just, we care about, the people. And so seeing those really makes my heart warm.
That's awesome. Yeah. I love that. Last question here. For someone that's considering selling, but they're not sure about the best method or platform for them, what would your advice be to them in determining if CLHbid.com is a fit or maybe not?
I would say give us a call. Yeah. That's one thing. We're not a fit for everybody. If you've got too many improvements and you got a home quarter, we won't take it. We're not Walmart. One thing we've made as a team is a promise never to overpromise and underdeliver. So give us a call. We don't mind spending time looking at your assemblage and talk to you. We don't take over advisors, and either our tax people work with yours. So there's no fee for basically discussions, Zoom calls, meetings in person, and we'll be honest with you. Definitely, we don't take everything that everybody that calls us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just want to have a conversation. I think all we ever ask is just to have a chance to sit down and talk. We'll be very honest if it doesn't fit our platform. But we just want to have that and see if it does.
And go from there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, unless there's any parting words from either one of you, I think that's going to do it for our inaugural episode here.
Thanks, Evan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. A lot of fun having you here. For our listeners, if you enjoyed what you heard here today, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your platform of choice. It helps us get found in the algorithms, and it helps other listeners to find us for information that may be applicable to them. Make sure you give us a follow on social media as well. We're on Twitter or X. We're on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're basically everywhere you want to find us. So give us a follow. And then, of course, this wouldn't be a podcast without a little bit of shameless promotion. So if you are interested in selling farmland, please reach out to us. All of our contact information is available on our website at CLHbid.com. Thanks for tuning in. I hope this was a positive exchange for you.